In this training, we're going to go over some of the city's free web tools that you can use to look up information about properties in your neighborhood and how you might be able to use those for your community organizations. So we're going to go over what tools are best to answer questions about different kinds of property questions, such as zoning, what kind of permits or licenses have been obtained by a property, vacant property, where you can look for current and historical maps and imagery, as well as how to access the city's public open data and how you might be able to use it. So first, we're just going to show some examples from a previous seminar with the Citizens Planning Institute, where some participants shared how they have been using some of these tools. So Dana Mitchell from Girard Estate says that she uses them to look up whether a certain property is covered by her RCO, as well as whether what RCO someone belongs to. So RCOs, as you're probably aware, are the organizations that have review capabilities over zoning variants within certain areas of the city. So this is information that you can get in Atlas, and we'll show you how to do that. Tara Gontek from Holmesburg said that she uses it also for zoning. She can pull up the information right on her phone about whether a property has the right permits. Venice Whitaker in Fishtown says that she uses them to look up whether properties have been have received historic protection, and be able to nominate them to the Historic Commission. Daniel Adair in Bridesburg says he uses them to look up old deeds and zoning on properties. And Angela McFadden in West Poplar uses them to look at the properties with the community garden over the aerial imagery. So these are just a few of the examples of how community organizers and community organizations are already using this information and these tools. We received a number of questions and examples ahead of time from those of you attending this this training. So we know that there's a lot of use out there, and hopefully you will learn something new. So let's say you have questions about an address, like what is it zoned for? Have they gotten the licenses and permits they need? Does it have a history of violations or damage? Has it been issued a zoning variance? What does it look like now, or what did it look like in the past? If you want to know where to vote and who your elected representatives are, and what RCO organizations have jurisdiction over a certain addresses area. So all of these questions and many others are a good place to start with Atlas. Atlas in general is a very good entry point for a lot of these questions. If you're not sure where to look, Atlas is often a good place to start. For instance, it combines property data from lots of different departments into a single web application that you can search. You can search for an address and find all this information in one place. You can find historical maps, the imagery of the street view that we mentioned earlier, as well as overhead imagery and information about zoning. So we're just going to exit the presentation and do a little demo. So if you go to Atlas, this is what you will see. You'll see this home page. You see this map over here. And in order to look up some information, you can either click on the map, or you can type in an address, an OPA number, a DOR map reg number, or you can also type in an intersection and that will navigate to an area of the city. So we're going to start by zooming in. We'll just pick a place. So when you zoom in, the map becomes more detailed. It shows local landmarks that have been identified by residents. And if we click on SEPTA building, we see that in the left-hand side, this information pops up that tells us information about the building. So it tells us the address that we've searched for. And this first section, so these several tabs over here open up one at a time. So this section on property assessments shows information coming from the Office of Property Assessments, which is responsible for evaluating property for property taxes. And we can see that this tells us the OPA account number, which is used for a variety of city services. If you're applying for a program or a permit that requires you to put in your OPA number for the property that you're applying for, and you don't know what that number is, you can search in Atlas and it will tell you. It tells us that OPA number. It tells us what the address is according to on file with OPA, which can sometimes be a little bit different from what it might be called by somebody else. It says who owns the property, most recently assessed value, when it was most recently sold, and how much it was sold for. You can view more information on a different site called Property Search, which I'm not going to show right now because we're going to look at it later. But it includes more details about characteristics of the property. Right now, because we get a lot of questions about this particular information on sale and owners and how often data gets updated, I wanted to explain where the data that is shown in Atlas and these other sites comes from and how often it's updated. So all of the information that is shown in Atlas comes from the same data that's published as open data, which I'll also explain more later. But this data is updated for the most part daily. And so whatever you're seeing in Atlas is, or in one of these other sites, is the most recent data that is available to city systems. One thing that people notice is that a lot of times this information about the ownership of the property and when it was sold might not be updated, even though it was sold a couple of months ago. And that's not because the data in the website is behind. That's because the information actually hasn't been processed through the various systems and procedures that have to be completed in order for the city to fully record the incidence of this sale. So whatever information you are seeing on Atlas, that is the most recent information according to the city. And that goes for the rest of the data that we'll look at as well. So this first section is on property assessment. This next section is about information that comes directly from the Department of Records. So the Department of Records is responsible for recording the official markers of the property, the official extent of the property. They record the deed and they store the deed of sale, as well as deeds of transfer and many other documents. And so what you see here is that the map background has changed. And this is because the city has a few different ways of representing and identifying properties, which can lead to a lot of confusion. But for right now, there are a few different ways that exist. So what this map is showing is the property lines as explicitly stated in the deed as represented by the Department of Records. You find information here specifically about the map registry number, which refers to the parcel that is described by the Department of Records, some information about that parcel, as well as documents that are on record for this property. And these can be really valuable. So if you're doing research on ownership of a property, or whether a property has been, what the history of ownership of a property is, You'll find a lot of that information in here. So for instance, you can even click on this link to view a copy of that document. So this is an unofficial copy. There's a paid version of this service, which is called Philodocs, which would allow you to download and get a certified official copy of the documents. But for research purposes or sort of casual use, this provides all the same information. It's just not an official copy. So those links link directly to the document in question. There's also at the bottom of this section the ability to view these registry maps, which are copies of the old paper registry maps that had been maintained by the Department of Records. And sometimes, especially for property research, especially historical property research, there can be details and information that were recorded in these maps that isn't available anywhere else. So it's not necessarily something that gets a whole lot of general use, but for some academic or serious researchers, there can be some valuable information in there. So this third tab called Licenses and Inspections tells exactly what you'd expect. Information from the Department of Licenses and Inspections about the permits and licenses that have been obtained for this property over time, as well as inspections that have been completed by the department, any violations that have been recorded as a result of those inspections, and business licenses for operating at this address. So for instance, something that not everyone realizes is that rental licenses are classified as a business license. So for instance, one common question that community groups will have is if there's a rental property that isn't being maintained or seems to be causing a problem in the neighborhood, you can use Atlas to check whether the property actually is licensed as a rental property, which matters because it means that the property has to be inspected by licenses and inspections ahead of time. It has to follow certain requirements. So if someone doesn't have a rental license, they might not be doing everything that they actually really should be doing as a landlord. This section here also is a little bit different in that this is providing when someone applies for a zoning permit or a zoning variance, if there are specific plans associated with that application, those can be included here. So for instance, the copy of the permit with details about what they're actually applying for, and sometimes it will include maps of the or schematics of the architectural changes if that's the case. In these here, when we see permits, we see the specific type of permit that's been issued, which can tell you some useful information. Violations in particular. So one way that I've seen people use information about permits is if, for instance, a property is being sold, and maybe you're interested in buying a property, and the owner says that they did such and such work to fix something up, or say they replaced the roof 2 years ago, or whatever. You can look in Atlas and see whether they actually got a permit to do the work or not, or if they did it, under the table. And if they actually got a permit, it had to be inspected and verified that it was up to code. If they did it on their own, you don't have any real way of knowing whether it was done correctly. Here under violations, you can similarly see whether the property has a history of issues. So for instance, if If it looks fine right now, but you see here that it's had a long period of vacancy or some indications of significant structural damage that isn't obvious from the outside, that can be that can help you understand what might be going on at a property. And if you click on one of these links, you'll be able to see more details about that violation or permit or whichever type of record you're looking at, with just a little bit more details than what's included on the in Atlas. Including here is a link to the specific zoning code that is that the violation was a violation of. Okay. Next we have zoning. This is a very widely used data set. What you'll see here is on the right on the map, we have the overlays of the zoning districts, as well as if we zoom out, we can see overlays and steep slope requirements that are in place. So you can see not just the zoning at this specific property, which it says right here, it's Center City commercial mixed use, but you can also see the zoning, in the area surrounding it or wherever you want to look on the map. In some instances, there might be a bill that is pending to change the zoning on this property. If that's the case, it will be shown here. Any overlays that apply more broadly to the area that the property falls within are shown here as well as a description of what they actually entail. And any appeals for zoning variances will be shown here, and you'll be able to see whether that variance was actually granted or if it was, withdrawn or rejected. And here you can see which registered community organizations or RCOs have jurisdiction here. So here you can see there's 3 RCOs here, where they meet, how you get in touch with them. And this information is maintained and kept up to date by the planning department. I'll just go back here for a second. This description, Center City Core Commercial Mixed Use, isn't necessarily tell a layperson a whole lot. If you don't know a lot about zoning, if you're not familiar with the city's zoning code, this may not mean a whole lot to you. And just to give one of the other tools that we're going to look at later breaks down what the zoning actually means in a practical sense in terms of what uses are allowed at that property in plain language. So just to let you know that that's coming. So here under voting, this is a more recently added tab. It tells information specifically for this address about when the next election you're eligible to vote in is, the ballot for your location. So there's different representatives that have jurisdiction over different parts of the city. This ballot is specifically what this someone registered for this address would be seeing this election. It's not a mail-in ballot. It's not something that you can fill out and fill in. It's just a preview of what you would see if you requested a mail-in ballot or went in person. It tells you where the polling place is and some information about its accessibility. And it also tells you who your council district member is and some of their contact information. This specific tab, because voting information is required to be provided in English and Spanish, this page is actually directly, or this tab is directly translated into Spanish here. If you want to, if either you or someone you're working with wants to translate any website into a language other than English. In Chrome, there's a very easy way to do that, which is that if you right-click on the page itself, you can click. There's this option here that'll say something about translating. Mine is already set to English, so it says translate to English, and it will figure out what language the site is in, and then you can set what language you want it to show. So I have it set on English, but if I wanted it to translate it into Arabic, you can see that the site now is in Arabic, and I have no idea what it says. There are limitations to this. For instance, you can see that this here is not translated because it's a name that doesn't have an obvious translation. Some of the data that's coming through may not be translated, but it can give you at least a some better context around the information you're seeing if you speak a different language. The last tab is the Nearby tab, which, unlike the rest of the tabs, which each show information about the property itself that you've clicked on, the Nearby tab is showing you things that are going on around the property. So one thing that's shown in this section are 311 requests that have been reported nearby. 311 requests are essentially non-emergency reports, so they could be something like graffiti, pothole, illegal dumping, all kinds of things that people report to the city that need attention. And you can look at this when you highlight over the records in the table. It shows you on the map on the right. It shows which one it is by highlighting it as well. And you can look at it for the past 30 days, 90 days, or a year. You can also look at crime incidents that have been reported nearby. And I'm just going to zoom out because apparently we don't have any very, very close. And similar idea. You can see when it happened. You can highlight to see where it happened. You get the type of crime that it is. And in this case, you can look back at 30 days or 90 days. Appeals, zoning appeals. So these are essentially a way to look at zoning variances that have been applied for or either recently or are coming up. And so if you are interested in knowing what properties nearby you might be applying for a zoning variance that might be coming up, that you might be eligible to attend a community meeting about, you can look here and it will show you a brief description of what the variance that's requested is, where, highlights on the map as well, and the date that it's scheduled. Finally, vacant properties. So this is a little bit different from the other ones. These are likely vacant properties. So their city has a model that we'll get into shortly, actually, in a separate tool that takes data from various city agencies that can be an indication of vacancy, either a vacant lot or a vacant building, combines them together and comes up with an estimate of what properties are likely vacant land or likely vacant building. You can see here the same idea as the other ones, where highlight on the table highlights the location on the map as well. And these are not officially vacant. They haven't been verified as vacant. They're not officially classified as vacant according to anything necessarily. This is just a combination of factors across city data sets because there is no single official designation of vacancy that is comprehensive. So these are the tabs on the left that show the information about the property. I'm also going to show you a little bit more about the map itself, the map side. So one thing you've already noticed is that when you go between these different tabs, the map background changed. So we have this background, which is sort of a standard map. It shows addresses. When you zoom a little further out, it shows landmarks, and it shows property lines that are not official survey, based on official survey, like land surveying metrics, but are approximate and according to practical use are basically accurate, but they're not strictly accurate. If we open this tab, we see this map changes, and we see these parcel lines are drawn based on the legally surveyed deed descriptions. And if we zoom in closer, we can actually see the measurements themselves on these lot lines, in addition to specific labels and labeling the parcels themselves. If we go to zoning, we see that it uses the official deeded background, but it also shows the zoning categorizations, the zoning-based district categorizations on top of that. So we have those differences, and you're able to change the transparency of this layer depending on what you want to use it for. But you can also change the background to, and I'm going to switch here so you can see it better. You change the background from the sort of the cartographic map to annual aerial imagery that has been collected by the city on a nearly annual basis. And you can see it goes back 2020, goes back to 2015 for every year, and then a little bit less frequently back to 1996. So if we look at 1996, we see that there were no buildings here in 1996. You see, it's a little unclear whether those are buildings or not. No, they're definitely not the ones that are there now. So you can use this to look at how an area has changed over time. You can use it to look for conditions of roofs or backyards. There are also historical maps, which I'll zoom out just a bit so you can see a little better, that are both nostalgically charming and often have some very useful information. So depending on the year, you'll see the different labels of usage and street names, and these can be very useful for historical research as well as just illustration. And then sometimes, because we're not in Center City, in 1875, the map only covers Center City because that was the only part of the city that was actually Philadelphia. So you can change the background based on to see the overhead imagery. You can also look at, well, if we see an error like that, you can refresh and try again. All right. This is called the bird's eye view imagery, or sometimes it's called pictometry, sometimes it's called orthos, which means orthography, which is sort of this like 45-degree angle look that that we're looking at here. And this is also collected at the same time as the overhead aerial imagery. And you can see this very detailed view. I'm just going to highlight that you can also close that side panel if you want to focus on the map view. And you can also rotate this 360 degrees. See a different view if you want to see the back of a building, if you want to see the side of a building. And you can go back in time. So this goes back to We got 2014, 2013, 2011, 2008, 2003. Looks like we got all the way back to 2003. And so if we look at 2003, I see a very different picture. We have this pictometry view, and the last one we have is this street view, which opens in a similar window. We're having a technical issue with it at the moment that I'm recording this, but most likely when you actually view this video, it'll be working and you will see an image of what it looks like from the street of the property. And if you zoom in to the property itself, you'll see blue dots on the street as well as a camera icon pointing at the area that's being shown in the image, and you can manipulate the image in 3 dimensions. You can also move between the dots themselves to view different parts of the city. And like the other 2 imagery, both the aerial and the bird's eye view, you can choose from you can go back in time with the images. So the cyclomedia street view has the shortest period of time, but you can still compare differences and look at what the conditions were at a certain point in time. These can also open in a new window if you want to see even more large screen, and you can search and navigate completely within this view. All right. So I think we've pretty much covered Atlas. Oh, actually, no. I'll show one more thing. So another thing you can do in Atlas is if you want to measure the distance, you can use this tool here. So if we want to estimate an area, we can do that. You can even used to be able to move it. If we click this again, cancel, click this again, you can start a new measurement. And note that it tells us the exact points that I've clicked on. So if you can use this as well if you don't need to measure, but you want to know the exact latitude and longitude of a point on the map, you can use this for that as well. And if we finish, it will not behave because it does not want to behave at the moment. But you can already see what it looks like when it's drawn. Clearly, we're having a couple of technical difficulties with the site at the moment. And that's a great segue. So if you are using Atlas and you notice that there are technical issues like that the cyclomedia window doesn't, oh look, you can see what the blue dots look like that I was mentioning before. You click on one of those, it shows you where to. But if you're using it and you notice that cyclomedia isn't opening, you're not able to see the street view, or when you are trying to measure, something is going wrong. You can report that by clicking on this feedback button and telling us about it. And we receive this feedback. We respond if we have follow-up questions. You can also use this if you just have an idea. It doesn't have to be reporting something that's broken. You can just say that something you think would be a good addition or change to the site, or something that is not necessarily broken but is not working the way that you expect it to work. So that is Atlas. Atlas is a great entry point for getting information about properties in your area. The next tool that I'm going to have us look at, we already looked at that nearby tab, that nearby activity tab, which you can look at 311, crime incidents, zoning variances, and appeals, or that likely vacant category that I sort of briefly mentioned. If you are really primarily interested in vacancy, if you are wanting to find out about, you know, there's a building on your block that kind of looks like it might not have anybody living in it, or it's causing problems, or you have some kind of grant proposal and you want to try to get a statistic of vacant land in your neighborhood. Or if you are interested in starting a community garden and you want to see if there are areas where there's public land that is vacant that you could contact the city and see about purchasing or what have you. We have a specific site called phil.gov/vacancymap that is built off of that vacancy model that I mentioned before, that is used to identify buildings that are likely vacant. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of this because it is fairly complex, but it takes these various data sources from these vastly different departments, looks at what reasonable questions about things that would indicate vacancy. For instance, if they have a vacancy license, it's probably vacant. If the water was shut off, has been shut off for a while. If it's got severe code violations, if it has recently been demolished, which is something that L&I tracks. These are all things that are indicators that a property is likely vacant, whether vacant land or vacant building. That's aggregated, put together, outputs these estimates. So I'm not going to actually show the map itself, but this is what it looks like. You can see the green are likely vacant land, the orange are likely vacant buildings, and there are reports. You can click on the map and see the percent of likely vacant properties on that. All right. Now let's say you're not just interested in vacancy, but and you're also not just interested in what's going on at one specific location. You want to get a summary of what's going on a whole block or a smaller area. Or if the information you're looking for is for detailed property information, from such as past ownership, tax assessment history, and some detailed property characteristics like when it was built. The place you want to go for this is property search. And the property search is really focused on this real estate data. So what you see is that you're able to do a search that returns a number of results, and you can see this summary, these basic details just up front, and you can compare across the selection if that's what you need to do. Hold on. And I will demonstrate this a little bit more now. So currently property, if you go to property.phil.gov, you will get this website and you'll see this window, which will tell you that we're creating a new property tool, essentially. If you go to the new site, you'll see this. It looks a lot like Atlas, but it is specifically geared towards this property data. So if I can type in, what do I want to type in? Let's say I want to type in 1234 Market Street. All right, so it comes up with this address. If I want to, but let's say I want to type for a whole block. So let's say block 1500 Market Street. And this will return everything that's on that particular block. And I can click which one I want. I can also download a CSV of comprehensive information about each property that's listed here, not just these 5 fields here, but actually all the information that you see on the detail page itself. So let's click here. And what we'll see is you see a panel, again, similar to Atlas, that summarizes the information about the property that you've selected. So that includes the owner and the OPA information, recent sale information. This is going to be exactly the same as what's in Atlas. It's not more or less up to date. You can link over to the real estate tax balance, which is where you would pay real estate tax or check on past due tax, the valuation history over time, sales history, view L&I records, which are the ones that we looked at before, like the violations and licenses. And then these property details, including the year it was built, which is commonly used and of interest, a description of the property, some details. These details are not guaranteed to be accurate. They're not sort of official. They're not used in the valuation of the property, but they can be a good starting point if you're doing research on it. As well as we have information about the zoning, which if you want more information, this will link you back to Atlas, whether there's a homestead exemption on the property, and some other links to information about where this property is. So it's in these school catchments. To view more information, it will take you to the school district website. It's in this police district. You can see that website. One thing I will point out is this section here, which, because of what I mentioned before about how the ownership information can take a while to get updated, or there can just be other places where the data is incorrect. If you find data that you think is incorrect about a different property, or you know is incorrect about your property, the way to report that is not through this feedback link, because that just goes to us, the IT people. You want to submit an official inquiry. So what that looks like is you click on this form and you will proceed to submit an inquiry, which is essentially a report that there's something wrong with the data that needs to be checked and corrected. It'll give you the opportunity to provide contact information, and it'll create a case that they will that OPA will investigate. So here's what we have in property search. I'm just gonna clear this now and show another way to do a search. I'm just gonna do this. So if I want to select everything on, let's say, these two blocks, do that, and it'll bring up those results here. And again, if I am interested in just this area, but I want the comprehensive, I want to download the comprehensive property information about that area, this is a great way to do that, because you can then download the CSV and you don't have to go through going through all of the open data, which I will get into a little bit later. And you can select the area that you're already interested in right here without having to use a GIS program or anything like that. You can also create mailing labels for the selected addresses. So if for whatever reason there's a certain area that you either want or need to provide some kind of notice to, you can generate these mailing labels automatically, and they will use the information about property owner and the address to create the contact information for you. All right, let's move on to the next one. So let's say I just mentioned potentially needing to give notice. If you specifically need to notify nearby properties about an upcoming zoning appeal, or let's say you know of a property that has an upcoming zoning appeal and you never got notice about it, and you want to see whether you really should have gotten notice about it, whether you were located in the area where they're required to give notice, you can use this website, which is called the RCO Notifications website. It is a website that is created and maintained by the planning department, but it is a very useful tool, and it serves this one specific purpose, and it provides you a lot of information about how to go about dealing with this very specific process. So if someone is applying for a zoning variance, they're required to notify everyone within a certain area and on their block. So what you can do on this site is you click on a property, and it will automatically generate this selection of the properties that are required to be notified. You have the ability to download that list. It can also tell you which RCOs need to be notified if there are multiple ones. And in the site itself, it gives you additional instructions and details and information about the process itself, including templates of contact letters and things like that. Just to briefly show an example of what this looks like. You see this notice here. Click outside of it. Let's say we are in, zoom in. Let's say we're right here. We see that it has selected the properties that need to be notified. There are 168 properties. If we download this address list, it'll create a document that will be downloaded here into a CSV file. Info, this just tells us that thing we saw at the beginning. Template, instructions, contact information, legislation details. It's all very specific to this one purpose, and it provides you pretty much everything you need to know about notifying RCOs and neighbors about an upcoming zoning variance. All right. And just as a reminder, all of the URLs and website addresses will be provided in the email itself, so you don't have to remember all of these. That one is phil.gov/RCO notification. All right. Another sort of specific use that you may have that I sort of alluded to before is if you are interested in trying to understand what the zoning for a property actually means. So if it just says that it's CMX 5 commercial mixed use, that may not mean a whole lot to you. This website, which is also run by the planning department, is called the Zoning Summary Generator. And what it does is it provides a very readable understanding, very accessible understanding, and very practical understanding of what exactly the zoning for a property entails. It includes both the base zoning and any overlays that the property is covered by. It does not cover, for instance, if a property has already been granted a variance. So a variance to let them do something that is not within the standard zoning for that location. Unless the zoning has itself been updated by legislation and changed as a result of that, or later or something like that. If the property has acquired a zoning variance, that will not be represented here. This is just to explain the by right zoning that applies to this location. So if we take a look at what that looks like, let's say, and in this case, we can either click on the map or type in an address. I'm going to type in 3000 Market Street. I'm not sure if that's an address, but we will find out. Looks like it is. So if you look at this, it says it is CMX 5, commercial, center city core commercial mixed use, intended to accommodate mixed use high density development. But now it also goes into further detail about what this actually means. Use is permitted by right, multi-use rules, all in plain language, standards for what are required dimensionally in terms of side yard, required parking, different sign regulations, fencing regulations, anything else, and then these overlay requirements or applications that may apply. So this is a very useful tool as well, especially for trying to translate the zoning code into plain language. All right. Now let's say you want to find out whether trash and recycling trucks are in your area today. There have been issues this summer with the trash being delayed. You may not know whether it's actually going to be getting picked up on your trash day. You want to find out whether the trash trucks are in your neighborhood that day or if they're somewhere else. You may also, after a big snowstorm, want to know what streets have already been plowed. There is a website for that. It's called Street Smart PHL, and it tracks these details by using GPS on the trucks that the streets department operates. So this is all directly processed from live GPS data. It is updated approximately every 15 minutes, so it's even faster than the daily updates for the data that's in Atlas. And what this represents is whether a trash truck or a recycling truck, in the case of whether a truck has been on that block. It doesn't have the ability to say that they definitely picked up trash on that block. For instance, if they drive through and on their way to get to somewhere else, it may register that they passed that block because they did drive on that block. But for the most part, so this is not a guarantee that trash has been picked up, but it does give you a view into where the trucks actually are operating. So it can help you guess whether your trash is likely to get picked up today or if it might be more coming tomorrow. And very similar operation with this snowplow data. We can't actually look at a demonstration of that right now because it's not a snowstorm, but it's the same idea. So let's say these are the tools that we have prepared that allow you to interactively use a lot of the data that is produced and managed by the city. But let's say you want to work with it directly, or you want to use data that's not shown in one of these sites. The website that we have, where you can find pretty much all of this data, is called opendataphilly.org. And this is essentially all data that has been made freely available to the public for easy download and easy access. A lot of this data is updated daily. In some cases, it's updated weekly, but it is as up to date as is available. And justifications for open data tend to be both on the side of transparency and accountability and include improving operations. So this here is an example of, so here on this page, we see this is an example of what it looks like if you were to search for property data on Open Data Philly. You would come to this page, which shows you all of the resources for this data set, including these maps, including Atlas and property search, as well as these downloads that you have, download files. This is a visualization dashboard that's created by the Department of Health that is reporting on open data about COVID vaccinations. This is a map that was made by the Philadelphia Inquirer this September that uses open data on shootings that have happened in the city. Very serious issue, of course. And that is another one of the purposes and applications of releasing open data or of publishing open data, is that it makes it available to other people to use. So other researchers, journalists, community organizers, if you need to use it for grants or things like that, people who want to build apps off of it, things like the PHL Crime Mapper site, or if somebody just wants to use it for a class project. This data is available for people to freely access and use. So if we go to opendataphilly.org, we can search for data by various categories. It includes metadata. There is also a forum that is accessible where you can ask questions about open data if you have questions. And I'm just going to, so this is Open Data Philly. This is where you can go to look for data sets. We can look at these, we have these topics that you can browse if you want to look at what's available. Let's take a look at finance and budget data. So we have 13 data sets here. Employee earnings, contracts, businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at, let's look at employee earnings. Tells us a little bit of information about it. And it gives us the various resources that are available. So this visualization is going to be like that visualization of the vaccination data before, that we can look at and preview the information. So if we click here, we can see a summary of what's in this data set. There's also different formats for downloading it. So in this case, there's a CSV file, which is essentially a spreadsheet. And there's also an API which can be used programmatically by either websites or programmers who are writing some kind of automated process. So let's take a look at data sets that we might want to use. So the ways you can search, you have these organizations on the side. So for the most part, Open Data Philly is predominantly data coming from the city of Philadelphia, but there are other organizations that have listed data sets here that are freely available related to the Philadelphia area. There's also White Topic, which are what we saw at the beginning, department, and formats. So if you are interested in shape files, you can click here. It'll show everything that has a shape file. Now let's see if we want to look at permits, let's say. So let's say we saw in Atlas that, we saw those permits that are listed and we really wanted to get a comprehensive sense of what's going on. We can download a CSV, we can download a shapefile. We can also click on here to view metadata, which will give details about what's in the data set. So it tells you some more information about where the data comes from, as well as descriptions of what the data actually is. So if it has field names that you don't necessarily know what they mean, it explains what they mean. And if you download the data set itself, you can then work with it, and break it apart however you want. So finally, let's say you're interested in this open data, but you don't really have the software to work with it, or you really just want to get a preview of it and see what's on there before you download it to make sure it's the data you really want and need. The place you can go for this is Openmaps. It's called openmaps.phil.gov, and it is a way to explore and preview of many of these open data sets all at the same time. You can compare what they look like. You can compare what information is available in each one. So for instance, it includes protected historic places, flood zones, zoning appeals, demolitions and other licensed inspections, new construction, different places, types of public resources and infrastructure, like everything from water inlets to streets to street lights to city facilities, all kinds of information. So let's just take a quick look at Openmaps. So for here, one thing to notice is that unlike Atlas and Property Search and the other maps that we've so far looked at, if you click on the map, it doesn't come up with information about that address. So Openmaps is not about showing you a bunch of combined information about a single address. What it is about showing is previewing this data. So right now we're looking at the bike network. It's showing us different categories of streets that are architected to accommodate bikes, bike transit in particular, or particularly well. Can look at commercial corridors in this area, and if we click on one, it shows us the information about it. So it's going to be different depending on which data set we're at. If we see that a data set is gray like this, what that means is that you need to zoom in further. Usually it's going to mean that there are so many data points that if we looked at it from too far away, it is just going to crash the browser. So let's take a look at zoning permits. So this is going to show us zoning permits. Well, that was a bad choice. Let's look at building permits. Okay. Clearly, there were no zoning permits requested in that area in the past year. So we can see within the past year information about this permit. So we can see the number, type, description of what's going on there, when it happened, and what its current status is. There isn't a way to, filter for certain types of permits. You can't get super analytical with Openmaps. There isn't a way to really limit what shows up here. You can filter in terms of filtering which layers are in this list so that you can find something. So for instance, if you want to find schools, you can filter by schools, and it will come up with what the data sets that are about schools. But there isn't a way to filter for elementary schools or schools that have more than a certain number of students or something like that. That requires a more sort of sophisticated analysis, and that you would really need to download the data for directly. But if you just need a preview, if you just want to know where certain things are, if you just want to get a sense of what is in a data set that's on Open Data Philly, that's what you can use Openmaps for. Also, this button here, if you click on this, will take you again to the metadata, which provides more details about the data set. So, pretty close to being done now. And we already went over how to translate websites to another language, but for reference, you will have this in the presentation. So just as sort of a summary of what we have discussed, Atlas is really a good place to start. Atlas, the purpose of Atlas, the reason that Atlas was created fundamentally was to take all these different websites that had information where you would put in an address and look up information about it, to put them all in the same place so that you could get them all at the same time. And that makes it a really good place to start to look for information. You're not going to find every single piece of information there, but it's a good place to start if you don't know where to look. If you have specific goals, you want to remember these very specific applications, like the website to look up if you are working with a zoning variance, notifying and who needs to be notified. If you want to understand the zoning code specifically, if you're interested in vacancy in your area, there are the specific sites for these. And if you are interested in information about a property, but you want to look at multiple properties at the same time, you can go to Property Search and get that. I highlighted the feedback button at the bottom of each page. I just want to highlight that again because that is the best way to report issues that you may observe with any of these sites, or if you have ideas about what you think would make the site better. You click on this feedback link and it will bring you to a form that tells you that will allow you to report what you're having an issue with. I didn't highlight on some on Openmaps. There is a help menu that is that can remind you if you forget how some of this stuff works. Other than that, I think that is pretty much everything. I think that you now know everything there is to know about these websites. Thank you. We hope that if you have ideas or issues, that you will get in touch. And if you have other needs for ways that you would like to use city data, or ways that questions you have about open data or data that the city is providing, or the data isn't able to answer your questions, please reach out. So thank you.